In this video, I'm going to broach a topic that is going to make some people unhappy. It's going to make them upset for various reasons. I'll probably lose followers. I'll get some angry letters and texts and emails. I'll be banned from another set of platforms, probably. Called a conspiracy theorist, and most ironically, a rad trad. Oh well. I want you to bear with me and hear me out in this video. I try to live my life like a juror at a trial, and I see every day as an opportunity to examine evidence that's put in front of me. Every day in our 24/7 media, or I should say hypermedia culture, someone makes a truth claim, someone else contradicts that truth claim. Someone else tries to sell me something or convince me to do something or to think something or not to think something. The goal is to rationally sift through the evidence, weighing out the arguments in your mind, thinking things through for yourself. So let's get to it. In this video, I present 7 pieces of evidence that Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the former Cardinal Archbishop of Buenos Aires, who is now called Pope Francis, is an anti-pope. Now, you can rewind it, but I said anti-pope. I don't mean bad pope, although there's lots of bad to be had, and I don't mean antichrist, although him being a remote dress rehearsal for the antichrist makes a lot of sense. An anti-pope is a man falsely believed to be the pope, but is not duly, validly elected to the chair of Peter, while the real pope is on the throne. According to the original Catholic Encyclopedia published in 1913, there have been 29 anti-popes in church history, the last one being in the 15th century, anti-pope, Felix V. Wikipedia says 41, the Encyclopedia Britannica puts anti-popes at 37. So 6 of the 7 items of evidence have to do with the strange abdication of Pope Benedict XVI, and why it's not only incomplete, but why it seems to invalidate itself in light of the canon law that it purports to following in abdicating. The last of the 7 has to do with the possible canonical crimes committed by the liberal St. Gallen Mafia cardinals in the election of Bergoglio on March 13th, 2013. And believe me, let me say at the outset, I understand that this whole topic is extremely taboo, especially for conservative Catholics, that this is a bright, jagged, red pill. I also understand that there are powerful forces in the church and outside the church, very much invested in keeping people silent about this hypothesis. Conservative Catholics who should know better especially do not want me talking about this. I've been told in very grave terms that I'm in spiritual danger, that I'm walking on thin ice with God, and that Canon 1404 says that the first see or the Holy See is judged by no one, unquote. Well, the context of Canon 1404 is the competent forum provided by a canonical trial. You'll find that in Section 7 of the 1983 Code of Canon Law, and that has nothing whatsoever to do with the question of whether or not a given sovereign pontiff is the real pope. I am not conducting a canonical trial, and I'm certainly not judging the Holy See or anyone else. The cardinals of the Catholic Church are the ones assigned to sort out questions like papal elections and papal abdications. And so far it looks like a grand total of 0 of them are interested in even looking at this. I'm also not debating whether or not the Church has the authority to depose a pope who is a heretic. I'm aware of the arguments of St. Robert Bellarmine and St. Francis de Sales, and I know that there's some very sharp-elbowed opinions on the internet about all of this. This is not what I'm talking about either. Whether or not Francis can be formally pronounced a heretic, or even if he is a formal heretic, has nothing to do with the evidence that Benedict XVI is still the real pope. Nor is what I'm saying evidence for sedevacantism. Sedevacantism is the belief that the chair, the sede, is vacant, and most sedes hold the last legitimate pope was Pius XII, who died in 1958. And since all the cardinals who voted in the conclave after he died that gave us Pope John XXIII, they're all dead, which means Christ was either lying or got it wrong when he promised that St. Peter's would have successors in succession until Christ returned. This is also not that. This is evidence, 7 pieces of it. Now, not every individual item is a slam dunk persuasive bit of evidence, but I think the cumulative effect will hopefully get you thinking about the possibility or the probability that it's true. I present this evidence to begin a very important and long overdue conversation in the Catholic Church about this. Remember, this is a binary question of is or is not Benedict XVI still the valid Pope? In no particular order, piece of evidence number 1. The term Pope Emeritus is not only strange, but has no precedent. It was insisted on by Pope Benedict XVI, as was the decision to live in the Vatican, in the Mater Ecclesiae residence adjacent to the Vatican Gardens. In addition to the Pope Emeritus title, it's downright confusing to have 2 popes in Rome at the Vatican, one active and one retired. The kiddie porn platform Netflix even produced a movie called The Two Popes. Pope Benedict XVI seems to have resigned only part of the papacy, the active ministerium, the executive sphere of the papacy that empowers a pope to appoint cardinals, to write magisterial documents, and to serve as the head of state of Vatican City. He did renounce that. So he stopped doing, but he didn't in some sense stop being the Pope. In other words, he did not seem to resign the munus, or the office, the charge itself of the papacy, the identity as Pope. I interviewed Professor Edmund Maza about this. You can click the link below to find out more information on that distinction. Dating back at least to the early 1960s, then Father Joseph Ratzinger had already begun to theorize that the office of the papacy can be bifurcated into these 2 separable elements, munus and ministerium. It is odd, perhaps providential, that decades later he would rely on this very bifurcation in the act of abdicating, or attempting to, on February 11, 2013. That's the day, by the way, that St. Peter's Church was struck not once, but twice by lightning. Quite rare. Quite odd. And also in some interviews that appear to affirm that his boss is still the Pope. What do I mean? Well, let's get specific. At the Pontifical Gregorian University on May 20th, 2016, Ganschwein asserted that there are not 2 popes, but, quote, a de facto expanded ministry with an active member and a contemplative member, unquote. He also said Benedict has left the papal throne, and yet, with the step made on February 11, 2013, he has not at all abandoned this ministry. Instead, he has complemented the personal office with a collegial and synodal dimension as a quasi-shared ministry, unquote. What on earth does this even mean? Did I miss where Jesus called both Peter and Andrew to be his first representative on earth after he went back to heaven? Pope Benedict himself, in his last general audience on February 28, 2013, told the huge crowd that gathered, and I quote, "The always is also a forever. There can no longer be a return to the private sphere. My decision to resign the active exercise of the ministry does not revoke this," he said. He goes on, "I no longer bear the power of office for the governance of the Church, but in the service of prayer, I remain, so to speak, in the enclosure of St. Peter," unquote. If you're confused, you're not alone. This has been clarified by Archbishop Ganschwein. He still signs letters and documents as Pope Benedict XVI, PP, which stands for Pastor Pastorum or Pontifex Pontificum, both of which are formal titles of the Vicar of Christ. He still wears the white zucchetto on his head. He still wears the white papal cassock. Believe it or not, Benedict wrote the following in February 2014 in an Italian newspaper almost a year after he left the papal spotlight. Quote, "I continue to wear the white cassock and kept the name Benedict for purely practical reasons. At the moment of my resignation, there were no other clothes available. In any case, I wear the white cassock in a visibly different way to how the Pope wears it. He goes on, this is another case of completely unfounded speculations being made, unquote. With respect, this is absurd. No other clothes available? The letter to that Italian paper was published almost a full year later. Really, still no other clothes available to the Pope Emeritus of the Catholic Church? Either Benedict didn't write that and is a kind of prisoner of the Vatican, or he didn't really think it through before he wrote it. And that is highly uncharacteristic of everything else we know about the careful scholar Joseph Ratzinger. Which leads me to item number 5. This is a strong bit of evidence here. There are at least 3 errors in the official Latin Declaratio that was read by Pope Benedict on February 11, 2013. This is not the place to review them, but I would direct your attention to the link below to the 2021 book by Professor of Law from Medellin, Colombia, Professor Estefania Acosta. It's titled Benedict XVI, Pope Emeritus? Professor Acosta reviews the Latin mistakes and reminds us that it's a principle of traditional canon law that every rescript, every brief, every papal bull containing a fault in the Latin language makes that document null. The question becomes whether you believe that someone who is renowned for decades for his linguistic and theological precision, who could write, dream, and speak in the mother tongue of the Church, Latin, would be so haphazard in composing the very document of all the documents that he wrote. This one would be analyzed for untold years to come about the most important decision of his life, the last papal act that he made. The number of leaders who don't accept the validity of the Bergoglio papacy grows around the world. Now, this reality contradicts the other canonical principle known as Pacifica Universalis Ecclesiae Adhesio, unquote. I know it's a mouthful. It really means a universal, peaceful acceptance by the Church that a papal election is legitimate. Now, there are good and sincere Catholics that hold to this, and they say that this principle contradicts the idea that Benedict's abdication was not valid because it was peacefully and universally accepted. But I think there are 2 problems with it. The first is that there never really has been universal nor peaceful acceptance by the Church of the Bergoglio papacy. If you're Catholic and you're watching this, didn't you find something off about him from the beginning, maybe from the first moment? Have you accepted his actions peacefully? Orthodox and traditional Catholic commentators all over the world, I was one of them, began to express grave reservations early on about the grandiose acts of superhumility and mostly the doctrinal chaos generated by Francis and his ecclesial Amen corner. Aren't you one of them? The second problem is that the principle of universal peaceful acceptance dates back before the medieval era when popes were elected by acclaim by the people of Rome. Besides, not only have universal and peaceful not been defined, the principle was never a defined dogma either.